Daniel's return to the village was not marked by celebration, nor curiosity, nor even whispers. This time it was strictly business, cold and final. The years had sharpened him, carved the softness from his edges, and now he moved through the village with the measured confidence of a man closing a deal, not revisiting a home. His purpose was singular: to finalize the acquisition of his family's ancestral home. The last and most personal piece of land he had been quietly buying back through intermediaries for years. The house, once a symbol of refuge, memory, and the warmth of his mother's voice, now sat tired and worn. Its cracked walls and drooping roof a reflection of Keen's neglect and the weight of years, spent chasing pride over responsibility. For Daniel, this house was no longer a home, it was a prize. The final act in a story he had carefully orchestrated. When Keen learned the identity of the buyer, the man who had so efficiently outbid and outmaneuvered him at every step, his world caved in. He arrived at the edge of the family compound, breathless, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his mistakes. He had been prepared to face a faceless investor, another greedy businessman from Lagos. He was not prepared to find his own brother standing there, crisp, composed, and holding the contract that would strip him of everything. Shock rippled through Keen's face as his pride dissolved into panic. "Daniel, no, you can't do this. You're my brother, blood. You can't take this house. From me, it's all I have left," he pleaded, his voice cracking, raw with disbelief. But Daniel's expression remained steady, untouched by the desperation unraveling before him. He stared at Keen, not with hatred, but with something cold and different. "Blood." Daniel repeated quietly, as though tasting the word. "Blood doesn't make you family. You burned that bridge the day you destroyed my chance to leave." The words cut through the thick village air like a blade. Keen staggered, his mouth opening and closing in a silent scramble for defense. He tried to grasp at the past, at the shared childhood, at their father's name, anything that might still bind them. "I was young, Daniel. I didn't know what I was doing. We were kids. The boys, they pushed me. They told me to." But Daniel's slight shake of the head silenced him. "No, you knew exactly what you were doing," Daniel said, his voice calm, almost soft, as if explaining something to a child. "You wanted me trapped. You wanted me broken. You needed me small so you could feel big." A long, suffocating pause followed. Daniel glanced briefly at the house, then back at his brother, the corners of his mouth tightening not in anger, but in grim satisfaction. "You think I didn't know it was you," he continued, stepping closer. "I knew. I've always known. Mr. Benson told me. He saw you near my room that morning. I knew before I ever boarded the bus to Lagos, but I also knew something else. You would destroy yourself faster than I ever could. So I waited. I built. I bought. I made sure to come back, not for the village, not even for Ubit, for this moment." He held up the signed papers, the final transfer deed, the proof of what he now owned. "You see, I didn't come to beg for acceptance. I came to buy the very ground you thought I didn't deserve to stand on." Keen's knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed onto the dusty ground, his head hanging low as the weight of his pride, his cruelty, and his years of blind arrogance crushed him all at once. His hands trembled, his breaths ragged and shallow. I was wrong, he whispered. But there was no force behind the words, just the hollow echo of a man realizing too late that he had spent his life building walls against the One person who had never actually tried to take anything from him until now. Keen's voice faltered as he choked out, "I was scared. I didn't want you to leave me behind." Daniel watched him, unmoved. There was no surge of victory, no satisfaction like he had imagined in the silent nights when he built his empire. In Lagos, all he felt was a dull, distant ache where the hunger for revenge used to live. He had thought this moment would heal something, that standing over his brother would make the years of shame and abandonment dissolve. But instead, it only made him feel empty. The boy who once cried himself to sleep in that house was long gone. Only the man remained, the one who had learned that power could buy silence, but not peace. Cunnel, waiting nearby, stepped closer, uncertain whether to interrupt the suffocating silence between the brothers. Daniel handed him the signed deed, without a word. As they turned to leave, Keen called after him one last time, his voice broken and small. "Daniel, please. What am I supposed to do now?" Daniel paused but did not turn around. "You survive, the same way I did." And with that, he walked away, leaving Keen kneeling in the dust, surrounded by the ruins of everything he had tried to protect. Daniel Hugo stepped out of the gleaming black SUV, his Italian leather shoes pressing into the familiar but long forgotten dirt of his childhood village. The sun beat down, unforgiving, as if testing whether he truly belonged here again. His tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and gold wristwatch shimmered in stark contrast to the faded, threadbare clothes of the villagers who had gathered around. Curious eyes followed his every step. Conversations faltered. Baskets hung mid-air in frozen hands. "Is that really Daniel?" Someone whispered, disbelief rippling through the crowd like wildfire. Mothers nudged their children. Old men squinted for a clearer look. Could this truly be the same boy they had laughed at? The same Daniel who had once fled these very streets, in tears? A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcomer. Young Daniel, small for his age, his face wet with tears as he stood surrounded by jeering children. Their cruel chant still echoed in his mind. "Shorty, Shorty, who would ever respect a man like you?" They had mocked him for what he could never change, their words searing into his skin like hot iron. He had vowed then, in the quiet of his shame, that one day he would return not to beg for their acceptance, but to prove that he had outgrown their ridicule. And now here he was, older, sharper, wealthy beyond their imagination. His purpose was simple. He was here to finalize the purchase of the largest, most valuable piece of land in the village, a piece that would place him above them all, both in stature and in power. He wasn't buying land, he was buying his place. At the top, as Daniel approached the village square, a figure stepped forward from the crowd, cutting through the heavy silence. Chuka, one of his loudest and most merciless tormentors. Time had not been kind to him. His once proud shoulders now slouched under the weight of years and unmet promises. Bitterness hardened his features as he sized Daniel up, the ghost of his old superiority flickering in his eyes. He spat on the ground and smirked. "So, you think money can make you tall?" The words, meant to wound, barely grazed Daniel. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle, then met Chuka's gaze with quiet, unflinching power. "No, Daniel," said, his voice smooth, controlled, but heavy with finality. "But it can make me untouchable." A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd, the shift in power now undeniable. The small boy they had once belittled had returned as a man they could no longer reach. And yet, behind the tailored suit and the steely eyes, a deeper story lingered. Why had he really come back? Was it only to claim land and status? Or was there something more? What had he built? What had he lost? And what ghosts still haunted him? The answers lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Daniel Hugo's earliest memories were steeped in the quiet brutality of his small Nigerian village, where a man's worth was measured by his height, his strength, and the size of his presence. From the moment he could walk, Daniel had been painfully aware of his short stature, a physical trait that made him an easy and constant target. His father, a weary farmer with rough hands and tired eyes, loved him in the only way he knew, through silence and survival, but even he would often say, "You'll have to work twice as hard to be seen as half a man here." Those words, though meant as advice, clung to Daniel like a curse, a lifelong burden he could neither outrun nor ignore. The village boys called him names, ridiculed him, pushed him around like a discarded pebble in their path. Even his older brother, Kenichu Kutola, stronger, and everything the village admired, grew ashamed of him. Keen's distance stung, more than the words of strangers. To him, Daniel was a blemish, a weak link in a family that could not afford softness. Yet, in the suffocating weight of that childhood, Daniel had one sanctuary: his mother, Adaze. She would kneel beside him in the quiet of the night, her soft hands cupping his face as she whispered, "Your size does not limit your dreams. Don't let them shrink your heart." Her voice was a bomb, a shield, the only place where Daniel felt seen, whole, and enough. But life in the village rarely allowed kindness to linger. When Adaze died suddenly, when Daniel was just 14, the ground beneath him cracked open. She had been his refuge, and without her, the world closed in mercilessly. Keen drifted further, swallowed by his own shame, and the villagers, emboldened by Daniel's isolation, dismissed him entirely, branding him useless, a waste, a boy who would never become a man. Years passed, but the sting of those words never dulled. Daniel left the village as soon as he could, carrying his grief like a secret, his mother's voice buried deep within him. In Lagos, he found a different world, one that cared less about where you came from and more about what you could build. And Daniel built. He clawed his way into the ruthless world of real estate, starting from crowded street stalls and leaky rentals to skyscrapers and waterfront properties. His name commanded attention. His bank accounts overflowed. People respected him now, feared him even, but none of it filled the hollow spaces left by his childhood wounds. He became a man of precision, of distance, never allowing anyone to close. Wealth became his armor, but the boy from the village still walked inside him, still heard the chants, still chased the approval that had always been withheld. His driver, Colonel, often wondered aloud why Daniel continued to return to that village, a place so stained by old scars. On one such drive, as the SUV hummed beneath them, Colonel asked again, half curious, half concerned, "Oga, why do you bother going back? You've already won out here." Daniel stared out the window, his expression unreadable, the Lagos skyline blurring behind him. "Some debts," he said quietly, almost to himself, "can only be paid in person." The past, it seemed, still had his name written on its walls, and Daniel had come to settle the balance. At 17. Daniel believed he had finally carved a small escape route from the weight of his village's judgment. After years of tireless hustling, hauling palm oil under the relentless sun, Negotiating with traders who barely glanced at him, he had scraped together just enough money to apply for a small college in Lagos. It wasn't a grand future, but it was his chance to leave behind the sneers, the shame, and the suffocating shadow of his brother Keen's contempt. Daniel had packed his modest bag with trembling hands that morning, his heart pounding with the fragile hope of starting over, but hope is a dangerous thing in the wrong company. Keen, long poisoned by the ridicule of his friends and the expectations of the village, couldn't bear the thought of Daniel rising above him, pressured to remind Daniel of his place. Keen did something unforgivable. As Daniel stepped out to say goodbye to his father's resting place, Keen tore apart his travel documents, scattered his hard-earned savings into the wind, and left him stranded. When Daniel returned, he found the shredded papers and the empty wooden box where his money had been, and in that moment he understood. The people closest to him could be the cruelest. Betrayal had a face, and it wore his brother's. The humiliation was suffocating. Word spread quickly, as it always did in the village, and the same boys who had mocked him as a child now laughed at his failure as a young man. Trapped and desperate, with no path forward, Daniel swallowed his pride and approached the village carpenter, Mr. Benson, a quiet outsider who, like Daniel, had always existed just beyond the village's inner circle. Mr. Benson was not like the others. He listened. He offered Daniel a place in his workshop, teaching him the careful art of carpentry, the precision of shaping something valuable from raw, discarded wood. In the stillness of sawdust-filled afternoons, Benson spoke words that clung to Daniel, more than his father's warnings ever had. If you stay where you are not wanted, you will rot where you stand. Go where your hands can build what they respect. For 2 years, Daniel worked under Benson's patient guidance, growing stronger, more skilled, more determined, and when an opportunity finally arose, distant connection offering construction work in Lagos, Benson pressed the money for transport into his palm and simply said, "Go." Daniel didn't tell anyone. No farewells, no explanations. His brother would wake to an empty room, and the village would learn of his departure only after he had long vanished. He left quietly, but with fire in his chest, vowing that he would never return until he had built a life so undeniable, so grand, that his name would carry weight even in the mouths of those who once spat on it. That morning, as the bus pulled away from the village, Daniel did not look back. What was there to see? His mother was gone, his father buried, his brother a stranger, and the village nothing but a place where he had been measured and found wanting. Lagos, with its noise, its steel, and its relentless pace, waited for him like an open battlefield, and Daniel was ready to fight. Life in Lagos was a battlefield of its own. Daniel quickly learned that the city's towering skyline did not erase the cruel perceptions he had left behind. Even in the bustling construction sites where men labored, side by side under the weight of steel beams and concrete, his height drew smirks and patronizing laughter. Supervisors piled extra work on him, colleagues took advantage of his silence, and his wages barely covered his meals. Yet Daniel refused to quit. The memory of his brother's betrayal and the sting of his village's rejection clung to him like a second skin, propelling him forward through blistered hands and sleepless nights. He swallowed every insult, outlasted every hardship, driven by a quiet, relentless fury to become more than what they had allowed him to be. His life might have continued that way, caught in the grind of hard labor, if not for the day fate intervened. On a scorching afternoon, the son of Chief Maxwell, a powerful real estate developer, wandered too close to a collapsing scaffold on the site. Without thinking, Daniel lunged, pulling the boy out just as the wooden frame came crashing down. It was an act of instinct, but for Chief Maxwell, it was a debt that demanded repayment. Impressed by Daniel's quick thinking and work ethic, the chief offered him an apprenticeship. For the first time, Daniel stepped away from manual labor and into air-conditioned offices, learning the intricate dance of property valuation, negotiation, and project management. Under Chief Maxwell's mentorship, Daniel devoured knowledge, with the same hunger he had once reserved for survival. He studied contracts, navigated land disputes, and observed how power flowed in quiet, calculated moves. What Lagos had denied him in kindness, it offered in opportunity, and Daniel seized it without hesitation. While Daniel's star was rising. The weight of his family's collapse dragged on in the village. Keene, who had inherited the family land, after their father's death, mismanaged it recklessly. Prideful and desperate to maintain the illusion of strength, Keene fell into the traps of quick loans and empty deals, each one chipping away at what little the family had left. The home where Daniel's mother once whispered to him now stood on the brink of seizure. Out of options and drowning in debt, Keene reached out to Daniel. Out of remorse, but out of necessity. He had no idea his estranged brother had become a man of wealth and influence, nor that the boy he once crushed now sat in boardrooms negotiating multi-million euro properties. Daniel read Keene's letter with a detached calm, unmoved by the request, though the past flickered painfully beneath his hardened exterior. By then, Daniel had become a man who built walls higher than any property he developed. He had wealth, power, and respect, but he kept his life meticulously distant. He trusted no one, formed no deep relationships, and kept his emotions sealed away like fragile relics he dared not touch. Connell, his loyal driver, and perhaps the only person who saw glimmers of the man behind the armor, often tried to pull him towards something resembling healing. "Ogre, you're rich now. You can let it go, you know," Connell would say gently during their long drives. But Daniel would only shake his head, his gaze cold and far away. "Closure is not something people like me can afford," he would answer. "Success is my only revenge." And revenge, it seemed, came in quiet, patient strokes. Daniel, operating through carefully constructed shell companies, began acquiring land in his village at obscenely low prices. The same villagers who once jeered at him now found themselves desperate to sell, victims of poor harvests, mounting debts, and the slow decay of rural life. They never saw Daniel behind the transactions, never connected the powerful buyers' names with the boy they had once dismissed. He bought their land, their pride, their security piece by piece through intermediaries who knew never to speak. His name, his rise was precise, controlled, and void of the satisfaction he thought he would feel. Yet as the years passed, the cracks in his isolation deepened. Connell remained the quiet voice at his side, gently prodding Daniel to consider that perhaps his war had gone on too long, but Daniel dismissed him each time. The village could fall, his brother could drown in his own ruin, and the past could beg at his feet, would not soften him. He told himself that this distance, this detachment, was necessary, that returning in power was the only way to silence the ghosts, but deep within, the boy who had once sought his mother's comfort still lingered, still wondering if the echo of her voice might be found somewhere amid the rubble he was leaving behind. As they drove away from the village, Daniel sat in rare contemplative silence, his gaze fixed on the fading outline of the house in the rearview mirror. The weight of what he had just done, what he had built his entire life toward, pressed heavily on his chest, but instead of triumph, all he felt was a hollow ache. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, casting a soft orange glow over the horizon, Daniel finally spoke to Kunal, his voice quieter, stripped of the hard edges it usually carried. "I thought revenge would heal me," he admitted, his eyes distant, "but this still feels empty." It was the first time Kunal had heard him speak without armor, without strategy. Kunal, who had watched Daniel rise and isolate himself, simply nodded, allowing the silence to stretch, knowing Daniel had reached this revelation on his own. The next morning, without fanfare, Daniel returned to the village alone. He found Keen sitting outside the family house, still defeated, still clinging to what little remained of his pride. Without bitterness, Daniel handed him the deed. Keen looked up in disbelief, his voice trembling as he asked, "Why are you giving this back to me?" Daniel's response was firm but not cruel. "Because I no longer need to own you to be free from you." He paused, locking eyes with his brother. "But there's a condition, take care of it. Fix yourself. Not for me, for what's left of our family name. Don't waste what you still have." Daniel left no room for argument. He kept the rest of the properties he had acquired, but he walked away from the need to completely destroy Keen. He realized that power wasn't in breaking his brother, it was in choosing not to. In the days that followed, the villagers, those who had once ridiculed him, began to see him differently. Their respect no longer came from fear of his wealth or his influence, but from something deeper and undeniable recognition of his resilience, his power, and his unexpected mercy. They no longer whispered his name as a warning. They spoke it with genuine respect. Daniel did not stay long. His war was over, and for the first time, he felt no urgency to win another battle. He left the village with the quiet knowledge that he had become everything they said he couldn't be, and, more importantly, that he no longer needed their validation to believe it. Asterisk, as the SUV rumbled down the familiar dusty road, the village, slowly shrinking in the distance behind them, Kunal finally broke the silence that had hung between them since they left. "So," he asked carefully, his eyes flicking to Daniel in the rearview mirror, "you've forgiven him?" The question lingered in the air, heavy but necessary. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the window, watching, as the cracked houses, the leaning palm trees, and the half-forgotten childhood corners disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance. His jaw tightened briefly, not in anger, but in contemplation. Finally, his voice emerged calm, measured, and almost quiet. "No," he said, his words landing with the weight of something final. "But I've freed myself." Kunal glanced at him again but didn't push further. He knew that was the truth Daniel had been chasing all along. Not forgiveness, not revenge, but freedom. The freedom to live without the chains of the past, without the bitterness that had driven every deal, every step, every sacrifice. For so long, Daniel had mistaken victory for erasure, thinking that buying the village, owning the land, and breaking his brother would somehow undo the years of humiliation. But now, as the village disappeared behind the dust, he realized he no longer needed to own what had once rejected him. He had outgrown it not in stature, but in spirit. Asterisk, as the engine hummed and the landscape stretched into long, empty roads. Daniel's mind drifted back to the one voice that had always believed in him, his mother's. He could hear her again, as vividly as if she was seated beside him, whispering into his ear like she did when he was small and afraid. Don't let them shrink your heart. For years he had thought he'd failed her. He had allowed his heart to harden, to shrink under the weight of ambition and old wounds. But now, for the first time, he felt something loosen inside him, as if the iron grip he'd held on his pain was finally easing. A faint smile, real and unforced, touched his lips, and Kunal caught it in the mirror but said nothing. Asterisk behind them. The village remained a place that once mocked him, a place that tried to define him by his size, a place that had broken him, but it now belonged to the man they all dismissed. Daniel didn't need to stand over them in victory, nor did he need their apologies. His presence, his success, his mercy, those were enough. The village would remember him, not because he crushed them, but because he chose not to. Asterisk as the convoy of black SUVs disappeared beyond the final bend in the road. A strange lightness settled over Daniel. He no longer had anything to prove, and for the first time, he wasn't running towards something or away from something. He was simply moving forward free. The past would always be a part of him, but it would no longer define him. Asterisk Connell's voice broke the quiet once more, softer this time. What now, sir? Asterisk Daniel's smile lingered as he answered, his eyes still on the road ahead. Now I live. Asterisk, and with that, they drove on away from the village, away from the ghosts, towards something finally, undeniably, his own. Asterisk.